Hey mental workers, you're listening to the Mental Work Podcast, your companion to early career psychology. And as always, I'm your host, Dr. Bronwyn Milkins, and today we are talking about educational and developmental psychology, or EdDev Psych for short. Listeners, have you ever found yourself wondering about how to better support students' mental health? Maybe you've got child clients that you don't know what to do with them, or maybe how to apply psychological principles to enhance learning and development. Or maybe you just don't know what an educational developmental psychologist does or who they are. In this episode, we'll be delving into these questions and more. Our guest is Jordan Turner. Hi, Jordan.
Hello.
So Jordan is a returning guest. She's been on a few episodes before. It's wonderful to have you back on again, Jordan.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Woohoo. And Jordan, can you please remind listeners who you are? And your icebreaker question for today is, what would colleagues be surprised to know about you?
I am an educational and developmental registrar. So I'm in the program, but I'm so close to finishing it. I just need to get all my notes together. And I work in private practice. And my icebreaker answer is that my colleagues would be surprised that I am way less put together at home. I'm very crazy at home, but I seem like I have my shit together at work.
So you've got your work persona and then your home persona.
Yeah, to some extent. I think it's just like I make sure that on the Zoom calls, nobody sees the chaos behind me.
Yeah. Yes.
It's like, don't pan down.
So do I. So like we're recording this over video, and normally if I record or I do Teams meetings, and then I'll always like substantially blur the background. But it's like in my background right now, I've got my sewing pattern on like the ironing board, and then you've got like books in your background.
Yeah, you can't see it. Just to the right of me is a vacuum cleaner just sitting in the middle of the room. So
yeah. So your workplace colleagues would be surprised to know that about you?
I think they would. I think if you talk to my friends, they'd be like, Jordan's a total mess.
Yeah.
But like at work, it seems like I'm put together.
Well done. Nice masking there.
Thank you.
Yeah. It's like, do I congratulate or just, I don't know. Anyway.
Yeah.
So let's talk EdDev psychology. Okay, can you share with listeners what drew you to this field? There are many different fields of psychology. What made you be like, EdDev psychology, that's for me?
It's really interesting because I think a lot of people get into psychology and just like are gunning for clinical.
Totally.
And I was one of those people, unfortunately. I finished my like honors year and decided I needed to get some more experience kind of in the field because it was really hard to get into the master's programs. And I ended up doing neuroaffirming, people block your ears, ABA for a very brief amount of time.
Yeah.
It wasn't for me in the end. I don't think I made it 6 months. They kicked me out. I was too nice, I guess.
That, like, just to like validate that, like that was a common pathway for folks a few years ago. There were lots of ABA type organizations, and you could be an assistant and they would train you and they would provide you with support in delivering ABA therapy to children, usually autistic kids. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the thing was that it was right on the cusp of the neuroaffirming.
Yeah, it is.
Like,
it was.
It was like a while. Apparently it's been around a long time, but yeah, at that point, it was still very much like pathologizing autism.
It was, yeah.
And just in case the listeners don't know, I'm autistic myself.
Yeah.
I was like diagnosed. But I ended up working with these autistic toddlers, and they were just the most beautiful kids. I loved them so much. It was like so lovely. And I was like, do you know what? I don't know if I really want to go into clinical anymore. I really like enjoy working with autistic kids. And I had gotten into psychology initially because I wanted to work with kids to kind of help them, but thought that clinical was like the only way to kind of go, like, because it was like top tier, supposedly.
Yeah.
And so then I got into this ABA therapy, worked into it really briefly, and realized I really like working in that population. My brother was diagnosed quite young, and so I was kind of like, I'm like exposed to autism everywhere. But then, like, working with these kids, I related to them, and I also I saw my brother in them, and I was like, oh, this is, like, so beautiful. I just want to help these beautiful little kids. And anyway, so that made me decide to pivot into Ed and Dev, because I thought that would be a good, more appropriate And just so everyone knows before they turn this off and yell at me, I am like 1000% neuroaffirming now. I definitely don't endorse ABA at all.
Yeah, or like a pathological view of autism. Yeah, no.
Oh, not at all, no.
I'm interested in the moment that you found out about EdDev psychology. Like, were you Googling? Because technically, a clinical psychologist can absolutely work with neurodivergent kids. So was there a moment when you were like, no, EdDev is the pathway that I want to go down?
I think I was aware of the different, like, subcategories, and I knew that there was clinical, and Ed and Dev seemed to be the other big one that you hear about, forensic and all that. But I guess, I mean, I might get into this later, I felt like Ed and Dev works with kids, so that seemed more appropriate. Like maybe I think I even looked at like maybe clinical programs, and I looked at what kind of courses they were doing versus like Ed and Dev programs. They seem to have more specialized like units on development, which was something that I was interested in, whereas clinical was kind of generalist across the board.
No, I would agree with that. Like doing a clinical master's right now, there's one unit on working with kids. Whereas my understanding of EdDev Psych is that you have several units, which is looking at child development, child assessment methods, child therapeutic methods.
Yeah, definitely. And not even just child, but like across the board, as you find out, is that Ed and Dev. And I was told this in an interview because I remember doing it. And I was like, oh, I just really want to work with kids. And the interviewer said, we don't actually just work with kids, right? Like we do all sorts of things, and we can work in clinical spaces as well. And I was like, oh, okay. And I went home and quickly like did some more research and felt a bit bad about.
Yeah, so maybe like that brings us into our next question, which is, what do most people get wrong about educational developmental psychology?
Yeah, I guess the big one is that it's only working with kids.
Yeah.
So developmentally, we're growing across the lifespan, right? So you work at the educational part does kind of lend itself to working with kids because, of course, kids go to school. But then you also think about university students who are in education and need support around that, and they're adults. And in later life, there's some ed and devs that specialize in older age. We did a few courses on like old age and what kind of neurological stuff happens when you're older, and the kind of things that older people are more concerned about. You can also do things for like life stages. So like if you're starting a family, an ed and dev can help with that. Like the kind of, and I know this from experience, but this like weird identity shift as you become a parent, or like what do you do after you finish school and you're kind of in the early young adult phase, and you're like, oh, and what am I even doing with my life? All of that stuff, all these kind of like crises, quotation marks, that people experience at various stages of their life can be addressed by Ed and Dev Psych.
Well, you've just opened my mind, because I was like, oh, that makes sense about the developmental. It's like life stages as well. And I was like, because that, the educational makes sense to me. That's educational settings. But I was like, development, yeah, child development, okay. But it makes perfect sense that you can have developmental stages across your lifespan. And it's like marriage, losing people, like even like a common trigger for therapy that I've just noticed anecdotally over the past few years of being in clinical practice is decade birthdays. So I see a lot of people come to therapy and they've just turned 20, 30, 40 or 50.
Oh, yeah. I had a huge like moment when I was turning 30.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh my God, my life is over after and then like I turned 30 and I was like, oh, okay.
I'm still
Which
here.
is kind of how, I'm alive.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's also a big one. Also like middle age and retirement, that sort of thing is some like that midlife crisis bit some people work through.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of that can be.
And when you think about like education, because I used to work with older adults exclusively, and I love working with older adults, but we always encouraged them to keep on learning, keep your brain active. And there's a great organisation, I think they're called University of the Third Age, and they do courses exclusively for older adults. It's like a university, but of course you can go at your own pace. And we always encourage them to do those sorts of programs that come from that. And it's just wonderful. It's so good to have, learning never stops, essentially.
I love that. I actually just wrote that down. So I was like, that's very intriguing.
It's awesome. Yeah. I always recommend it to oldies who are looking to expand their learning.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Because, like once you retire, there's so much idle time, and a lot of people have this identity crisis. Like, what am I if I'm not my career that I had for...
huge identity crisis. And a lot of people have that due to illness or various other circumstances. Yeah, so okay, that's really cool to know that that's a big part of being an ed dev psych. Jordan, could you walk us through like a typical day or week in your role? Like, what's the most ed dev week that you can give us that you would do lots of ed devy stuff in?
I think I'm not the most like striking example of ed dev because I work in private practice, but for me in particular, I might have a few sessions with schools to advocate for my client and their learning needs. If they're like neurodivergent, or, you know, they have strengths or weaknesses that are kind of in their cognitive profile, I might talk to the teachers and say, this is how this person learns better. You can put these accommodations in place or support them in this way. I often see kids one-on-one and parents. And so I don't just work with kids. I also tend to work with adults as well, but particularly neurodivergent adults. I do assessment. Some days I have like 3 hours of an assessment in the morning, and then I'm just writing reports afterwards. And those are pretty chill because not a lot of mental load involved in assessment once you know what to do. It's just kind of following the manual, and then you score it, and that's it. I had this better like formed in my head, but I just do like a lot of stuff because I'm in private practice. I have a lot of autonomy as well, so like I can sleep in when I want to. I kind of schedule my clients around my own kind of needs.
Well, maybe you can share with us what is the best aspects of being an ed dev psych or just your job.
I think the best aspects is being there to, I mean, fingers crossed, because I haven't been in the field that long that someone's fully grown up. But being somebody who'd helped influence the trajectory of somebody who might not have done as well in life, like helping them realize that they're worthy as a person, and they're capable. A lot of my clients have a lot of imposter syndrome or feel that they're stupid or have really low self-worth. So being that person there to say, hey, you know, you're not stupid. You're kind of adapting to what's in front of you, and you kind of just making your way through the world. I think in that way, I really enjoy the work that I do. Just knowing that I help kids in that way.
That's actually one of my favorite aspects of being a psychologist, particularly with neurodivergent folks, because I don't know if you know this statistic or if you know what it is accurately. I should look it up. But it's like kids who are neurodivergent will receive like 10,000 comments about how bad they are like before the age of 10 compared to neurotypical kids who don't, sort of thing. And I like I said, I should look up the exact thing, but I just know it's a discrepancy. And so I really love being a psychologist where I'm like, you have a unique profile of strengths and difficulties like everybody else. And here are your strengths, and here are the areas that you need more support in. Your strengths are wonderful, and your difficulties don't make you a stupid or bad person. And there's nothing wrong with you. You know, like I love being able to be that person that's like, you are perfectly fine just the way you are. And we need to give you more support in these areas. And it sounds like you like that too.
Oh, yeah. I love that. And it breaks my heart that so many people have been given the message that they're bad or wrong. And of course it becomes like a prophecy almost, because then like some of the kids I work with internalize that and they go, I'm a bad kid. I'm going to start.
It's so sad.
Yeah, it's devastating. And, you know, these kids under the right conditions can really thrive and be amazing. The amount of like neurodivergent people who are wildly successful. Yeah. Like, they were well supported, and we just like, if we could just do that for all our neurodivergent kids, that would be so amazing. It would just be like, you know, these people that think outside the box are the people that are going to change the world.
Absolutely, 100%. I've got these great, like, I've got two pictures. One is like, because they don't combine them on the same picture. So there's ADHD strengths, and then there's like, I love being autistic strengths. And I always show my clients these things, and I'm like, pick out what your strengths are, or like, here, I can see this in you if you can't pick it out. So these are the wonderful things about you. And sometimes that's the first time that they've been told these things. And yeah, like you, I find it really heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's really crushing. And it just makes me really sad that there's kids out there that aren't supported. And
Me too.
so I hope I'm that, like, I can be that person, that one person to say there's nothing wrong with you. You're perfect the way you are.
Yeah, me too. Okay. Challenges of being an ed dev psych. What do you find hard?
I'm going to be a little bit spicy here.
Yeah, be spicy.
Of course.
I love the
I
spice.
I think like people who say, I think if you're endorsed in something other than clinical, I think a lot of other endorsements kind of resent that they're not held to the same standard as clinical.
Oh,
psychs.
tell us more about that. What do you mean?
Like you don't get reimbursed the same way from
from
Medicare.
Okay, sure.
Or like people don't, like a lot of people don't know about NDEV. And,
Yeah.
And so like, especially like with NDIS, a lot of my clients kind of get knocked back if somebody other than a clinical psych has evaluated them.
Oh, whereas you guys, you do a lot of training and assessment and...
Yeah. Well, like a huge proportion of our training is in assessment and recognizing developmental conditions and stuff like that. But, it's interesting. I just think that the thing that's frustrating is when you get overlooked. And I think a lot of people who are not kind of in that mainstream clinical space resent that.
Well, we're not in therapy, but I'll ask you the therapy question that I would ask, which would be like, what feelings show up for you when you think about this situation of not being quite recognized?
I feel frustrated, but I think that's what a lot of like the hot topic in organizations, but I think AAPI in particular are advocating for like recognizing diversity across the profession.
Yeah, they are. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think like the AAPI stance is that, well, we've got like 8. Oh my gosh, I hope I got that right. 8 areas of endorsement.
I think it is like 8. Like, yeah.
Yeah. So we've got people who are very trained in particular areas. Why is it only one area that people can have more access to? When ed dev psychs have a very specific skill set that helps a lot of people. So yeah, I can empathize and feel your frustration.
Yeah, it is. It's a hot topic though. I think that, I don't know how clinicals feel about this. I think that a lot of ed and devs, like, because I've worked in communities and what are they called? Committees and stuff. And I've heard people voicing their frustration and resentment. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's a bit frustrating.
It doesn't surprise me because it's like, technically with like the increased Medicare rebate for clinical psychologists, that's to increase access to them. But what we find actually happens in private practice is that clinical psychologists charge $40 more. That ends up with a bigger salary. So
yeah, that sucks.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
what?
So, the frustration and, possible feelings of upsetness, they make sense in that context.
Yeah. But yeah, I think that's a hot topic that tread lightly when you bring it up.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else about your role as an ed dev psych that you find challenging? Like, for me, I've talked about this on previous episodes, but I'm not an assessment loving person. I find I like doing the assessment itself, and then like as an ADHDer, when I think about writing up reports, I'm like, I just go into like full like child tantrum mode.
Yes.
So yeah, tell us, is that challenging for you or are you cool with it?
As an autistic person, I kind of like the idea of being able to work without having to talk to anyone. So in that way, I enjoy that space.
Yeah.
But I definitely have like issues with the executive functioning bit of like forming words to explain somebody's like background. I don't really like that part of assessment. I think on the whole, I enjoy like the system part of my brain really likes analyzing cognitive profiles and how interesting how their neurodivergence manifested in that way. Like, it's really cool. I get really like nerdy when someone tells me an unusual special interest. I'm like, yes, that's so cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I find that really interesting as well. I've been listening to a bit more on stimming, and I didn't realize how many different manifestations of stimming exist. So I found that very interesting, and I imagine you find that interesting too.
Yeah, and some that you're like, oh, I didn't realize that was a stim, but apparently it is.
Yeah, so it's me like biting my cheek while listening to the podcast about stimming, telling people that biting your cheek is a stim, and I'm like, damn it, I feel seen.
Yeah, you're like, what?
Yeah. Okay, so it largely sounds like you quite enjoy being an ed dev psych.
I think so. Like, I I'm trying to think about what I don't like about it, but I think on the whole, I've really enjoyed it. Maybe I don't like working in a system, so I don't really like working for the man.
Yeah.
Quotation marks, like in schools or like in a hospital.
Yeah.
Because I don't like having to answer to people, and in that way, maybe I wouldn't enjoy it that much.
Yeah, because a lot of ed dev psychs, they do work in educational settings. Is that right?
Yeah. So what you often think of with an ed dev psych is like a school psychologist who's gone in and they work for schools and they do like kind of brief counseling for students there. The thing I didn't like about that was I didn't have the full kind of ability to support my client. You kind of just see them, stabilize them and send them on their way. And then you have like various parties that you have to answer to, like your school expectations versus what's ethical versus, what's best for the client and like how much can you actually hold for them. So that in that way, that would be frustrating for me. But I've structured my own career around enjoying the work I do, I think.
Yeah, no, wonderful. With being an ed dev psych in school settings, you don't have to have an ed dev master's to work in school settings.
No.
Do you know if ed dev endorsed folks get paid more? I guess it's a bit of a spicy question. I guess, how do you see yourselves in the school system, or is it just level playing field with everybody else?
Yeah, I guess my impression is that we don't get paid more.
Yeah.
We might have like more senior roles, I suppose, if we're kind of specialized, but I don't know if you necessarily get paid more because there's so few ed and dev, so it's a very close-knit community that often the school psych isn't ed and dev endorsed. They're usually just a school psych or a psych that decided to work in a school, or even like somebody who's not a psychologist at all, and it's just kind of a youth worker or something like that. Because there's so few psychs working out there.
Yeah.
It's a very in-demand area. So if anyone wanted to go work in schools as a psych, you're more than welcome.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. So with ed dev, do you feel like there's an increased demand for people who have the skills in these areas?
Oh, absolutely. There's no shortage of work for us. I think most people that I know of, their books close like pretty much instantly.
Yeah.
And if they're neuroaffirming, bonus, because that's very helpful these days. I think a lot of people are recognizing that. But like assessment in particular, huge need. People in schools, huge need. I think I regularly get like messages on my LinkedIn asking for if I'm interested in a gig or something like that. So there's no shortage of work for us.
Wow. Okay, that's good to know, because right now I'm just hearing that for some psychologists, they are finding it difficult to fill their books. So it is really good to know that that is an in-demand area and that those skills are quite valued.
Oh, yeah. I think if you're happy to do report writing and if you like working with kids, I don't think many people like working with kids. I think it's because it's a lot more involved sometimes, like playing and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's not what you envision necessarily if you go working in psychology.
Yeah, I wish those were my natural inclinations though, because to both of those things, I'm like, bleh.
Do you know what my favorite thing about working with kids was when I first started was I wanted to dress like a kid and not be told off at work.
Oh my God, I still want that for myself now. I look at little kids who wear like beautiful outfits and I'm like, why can't I have a pony fabric with stars on it and wear that and not be called weird? I
know that. And I was like, so like, and another reason why I was like, I'm going to go to private practice, kind of wear what I want.
Yeah.
And I was like, I think I'm going to dye my hair pink again because I used to have it, whatever.
Oh my God, you do what you want, Jordan. Yeah. No, go for it. That makes sense.
Hopefully that doesn't make me look odd to my clients. So I think they know me well enough now.
I got a tattoo last year and all my clients have been really nice about it. And sometimes they ask about it and sometimes they don't. And I think it's a big deal. And sometimes they have green hair as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it doesn't scare them off unless they're secretly scared off. But they still keep coming back, so I guess they're not that scared.
They're like, I'm not scared enough by the green hair.
Yeah, I'm a little bit frightened, but not enough to can you as my psychologist. Going into your focus areas, so you're passionate about neurodivergent folks and their families, right? And I understand that you were also quite interested in working with folks who are gifted and twice exceptional. Could you tell us a bit about your interests, like what brought you to be interested in those areas? And could you also tell us what twice exceptional means?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that, the phrase autism, ADHD, they like smashed it together.
Yeah.
It's ADHDers.
Yeah.
Pretty sure that's considered twice exceptional, but it's like multiple diagnoses at once. Twice exceptional, I think a lot of people assume that means like gifted level. I think people are steering away from gifted, though. It's like high ability is more acceptable.
Oh, okay, good. Okay,
but
sure.
I don't know. Like when I first started, it was somebody. I'm not sure. Maybe somebody.
I still use the word gifted, but I just notice it makes my gifted clients intensely uncomfortable if I'm like, hello, you're gifted, and they're just like, bleh.
Yeah, I often say like high ability.
Gotcha, maybe I should start using that, but that might be better received.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't matter. Like, I think, so I'll get into it that it's so loaded to be called gifted as well, right? And so twice exceptional can also be like autistic and high ability, so high IQ is what we're typically saying, but sometimes it might be like a niche, like skill that they have, like music or art or something like that, which is a little more harder to quantify.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And so what brought your interest into these areas?
I'm not so sure. I think I just really loved the complexity and how things intersected.
Yeah.
I really like looking at how high ability might intersect with autism. They seem to have very similar, like if your like special interest is something, you might like extremely deep dive into it. And if you're high ability, you might be like the kind of person that would go on to be like a leader in that field. And I thought that was really interesting. I wanted to kind of foster that ability to succeed and be amazing at what they do, but while still feeling okay with themselves, because quite a few gifted, high ability kids hate themselves or don't feel good about themselves because and especially if they're twice exceptional, which most of my clients are, I don't think I've seen a gifted person who isn't autistic or ADHD. So, I mean, I'd be interested to meet them, but they're often quite neurodivergent in some way.
Yeah, I guess like just having a bit of experience with gifted clients and twice exceptional folks myself, I noticed that they have specific needs in the educational system. So it's like the educational system isn't necessarily built for gifted folks. And so they may get bored, they may become disengaged, they may start behaviorally doing different things to keep themselves stimulated. Is this stuff that you observe as well?
Yeah, I've noticed a lot of my twice exceptional kids are demand avoidant because they really value that autonomy and find it frustrating that like they've already kind of grasped the concept and they'll kind of move on and be like, okay, well, I'm bored now, so... And why am I listening to this teacher? Because if they're autistic, reject kind of hierarchy and authorities. Yeah. Why am I bothering listening to this guy? Because he's clearly an idiot when I understand this at a much higher level. Or challenging the teacher and like, which is also quite fun. I love a challenging kid who just like calls people on their bullshit. And I know that that's come back to bite me because my daughter is quite like like, oh God. It's such an interesting way that their kind of divergence and their differences intersect. And so they simultaneously know the material, but for some reason can't get it out on paper, or their grades aren't reflecting that. And like the teachers are often like, I know you know this, you're very smart and all this sort of thing. But then like, they can't sit still long enough to write it down, or they immediately forget it because they're dysregulated, if they have executive functioning difficulties, like if they're ADHDers.
Yeah,
which part of... Yeah.
That really affects them because it's like everyone is telling me I'm so smart, but why am I getting like C's, So why can't I access or demonstrate my smarts in this area?
Yeah, what's wrong with me? Am I stupid? Or am I just faking this whole time? People think I'm smart, but I'm not really.
Yeah, exactly.
Or like a lot of twice exceptional kids kind of graduate and they used to be like evaluated by grades, but then once you get out of school, there's no grades to like measure your worth on. So then they're kind of like, well, am I even worth anything if I'm not contributing to society? Because there's a lot less structure outside of school. So then they're kind of like flying by the seat of their pants. Like, what do I do with myself now? Kind of.
Yeah, a lot of existential angst as well. Yeah.
Am I even a person if I'm not achieving? And like constant fear of failure. And, you know. Yeah, it's a whole like thing. Yeah.
It's very rich. It's a very interesting area, and lots of folks who struggle with this and being neurodivergent usually on the side.
Yeah, like I said, I haven't really seen any high abilities, and maybe that's why if they were high ability and not neurodivergent, maybe they're not in therapy. They're just kind of smashing through life. But like,
that's a good point.
I don't know. Like,
I don't know. I'd have to look it up. I'm trying to think of like the high ability gifted people I know in my life, and some aren't in therapy, but they should be. So. Yeah, I mean, like anecdotally, like for me, giftedness has gone along with some neurodivergence, but you know, it's like because they think differently and they approach situations differently, and they don't necessarily adhere to social conventions and the way that you're supposed to do things, and they're challengers and entrepreneurs, and it's really interesting.
My like autistic brain is like, I need to correct this one thing.
Yes, please do.
It's worth saying that if you are considered high ability, you're considered neurodivergent anyway, because you're divergent from the norm or the
that makes
baseline.
sense. Oh, thank you. No, I'm really pleased that you're able to correct that. Thank you.
I hope people don't pick me up on this.
Oh, no, thank you. I really appreciate it. That's a really good point to make. One area that I wanted to pick up on was that you have, I don't know if it's a special interest would be correct to say, but you have quite a bit of knowledge about demand avoidance. Is that right?
Yeah, I do work a lot with demand avoidance for some reason.
Yeah, and how do you approach, I guess, like assessing and helping folks who are demand avoidance? Like, is it always a problem or is it okay?
It's always interesting. The demand avoidant clients that I work with are usually really brilliant in their own way, but it's a slow game with demand avoidant clients. You really have to build safety in the room and make sure that they trust you, and that you respect their autonomy and treat them like a person and not like you're the therapist and they're the person in the room, like giving them that kind of, I'm treating you like a person.
Yeah.
Sometimes we'll have several sessions before they can get to any therapeutic work, just to get that rapport. And it's a slow game. I think anyone who works with demand avoidance recognize that a lot of work needs to be put into gaining that trust and building that safety for that client. I do assessment, and I have done assessment for demand avoidant clients in particular. They're often considered to be unaccessible because the demand is implied in the assessment. So if they're told you got to sit down and do a bunch of tasks so we can look at your IQ, way to set off like somebody who's afraid of meeting demands. I guess maybe I should even explain what demand avoidance is.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I was thinking that because I think a common misconception is that like they don't want to do the things, but my understanding is that they do want to do some things. They struggle to do those things. Even the things that they want to do are hard for them to do.
Yeah, absolutely. So essentially, a demand avoidant person feels intense anxiety when an expectation is placed on them. They're often diagnosed as like ODD or conduct disorder, something like that, or ADHD or whatever. I mean, I think demand avoidance is considered like a flavor of autism, you know? But essentially, it's like anytime a demand and expectation is placed on them, whether it's implicit or explicit, it makes it's like creates this intense anxiety in them, and they kind of find it really hard to do the thing, whatever it is. And sometimes if it's even things that they want to do, they can't because they just feel like paralyzed in what they're doing, or they shut down, or some kids find a way to kind of, I'm saying kids, but I also work with demand avoidant adults, circumvent the demand by like saying something and throwing you off the track. Like if you're like, oh, can you answer this question? They'll talk around it. Or, oh, look, a distraction, that sort of thing, just to reduce that anxiety. So the critical thing with demand avoidant clients is to reduce the levels of anxiety before you can engage and work with them. And if the anxiety is down, if they feel like they have control over the situation, then they can then do the work that they need to do, which is, whatever they're in therapy for. Sometimes it is demand avoidance.
So is the anxiety coming from feeling that they're not quite in control of what they're doing? So is that what the demand places pressure on them? They feel anxious because they feel that they need to do this thing that they're not in control in? Is that the right way or not quite?
I'm not sure if it's... I'd have to ask some demand avoidant people because I don't necessarily think that they are thinking, I don't have control here.
Okay.
I think anxiety comes from a lack of control, because if you can't anticipate what's going to happen, then that might make you anxious.
That makes sense.
And I wonder it could be a possible fear of failure.
Yeah.
They're not going to meet those expectations.
Okay.
And that's why I kind of wonder if it's maybe a twice exceptional kind of situation, because I often see that in my twice exceptional clients. It's just a very visceral feeling for them that they just, this is really uncomfortable. I'm going to try and avoid this discomfort rather than face it head on.
Yeah. I think we need to do a podcast episode on this one, because
gladly, yeah.
Because I have had a few clients who have the PDA flavor, and I would like to learn how to do it better. Because my natural approach in therapy, and because I'm neurodivergent as well, I don't enjoy hierarchy. So I'm very leveled with my clients, and I'm very okay if they're slow to warm up and trust. And I'll always be like, please give me feedback. If you tell me I'm doing something wrong, I will change it. No questions asked, like that's cool with me. And I have in supervision, like I have been told that that's not necessarily a great approach. Like I should be more hierarchical, but I think that's influenced by therapists' particular models that they adhere to, and I feel like this is pretty comfy for me as a neurodivergent person. But in saying all of that, I think I would like more strategies for PDA, so I think we should do a podcast episode.
I will definitely come and talk your ear off about PDA.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it. Yeah. So if there's any early career psychologists listening who are curious about the path to becoming an EdDev psychologist, what would you say to them if they're considering, they've heard that there's clinical and that's fabulous, and how would you encourage them? I don't want to say the dark side of EdDev, but that was my automatic thought.
I come to the dark side.
What would you say to them about EdDev?
I'd say that if you really want some specialized and niche training in working in the educational space or the developmental space, Ed and Dev's a good fit for you. It's a very close-knit community. I can't speak to the clinical kind of community. I expect that it's much bigger than Ed and Dev, but I don't know, in the media or whatever, they're saying that like a lot of Ed and Dev programs are being shut down now. So there's only like a handful of us. I think they're like in Melbourne. I think there's one in Sydney, and then there's a few in like Queensland, but like it's all on this side of Australia and not. So then that means that like other places like the NT, South Australia, Western Australia don't really have that many Ed and Devs there. So worth kind of thinking if that's like a niche you want to get into, that specific area, it's so helpful to do that. I think it's also highly, highly in demand space. Like I don't think that Ed and Devs ever struggle with finding work, because of the niche that we work in with kids, and it's just like upskilling us, particularly in working with kids and educational assessment. And because neurodivergence is popping off right now, everyone's going to get assessed and suddenly realizing, oh wow, that wasn't normal my whole childhood, let's go look that up. That's also kind of an Ed and Dev niche space. I mean, neuropsych do that too, and I know clinical do that as well, but it's really interesting. From the neurodevelopmental space, that's what you could do.
What I'm hearing is if you want further learning and unique and I guess specialized skills in educational assessments, working with kids, I guess differential diagnosis in developmental differences, then EdDev is a good fit for you.
Yeah, we definitely do like a lot of neurodivergent stuff. So we look at like SLD, intellectual disability. That's a really, I think that's a great place to go if you want to specialize in intellectual disability. I think it's called something else. Developmental disorder now. I don't know. Twice exceptionality, all the kind of different flavors of brains are really well addressed in Ed and Dev.
And I guess looking back on your experience of doing the masters, like, do you feel like it was worth it? Like, it really helped your practice and you feel good about having made that decision?
I do. I did mine at University of Melbourne, which was just an educational psychology degree. Surprise, surprise. So even though I talked about developmental, I was like, that they like prided themselves on specifically school-based stuff, even though I was kind of more interested in the development. But I felt like it was really helpful in, like, because, you do PD in, like, areas that you want to work in. It's a great baseline for, like, that knowledge, And so it's a great, like, I learned in my master's course to do thorough cognitive assessments, educational assessments. We talked about the different forms of neurodivergence, remembering this was early days when it wasn't, like, neuroaffirming practice. It was like right on the cusp of that. I learned about how to work within a system. We talked about group therapy. Family therapy is also one of those things that Ed and Devs work in.
Of course, yeah.
So a lot of that is kind of covered in Ed and Dev masters.
Well, it sounds really good.
Yeah, it is really good. Yeah, I mean, I liked it. I came into it kind of not knowing the full scope of it, and came out of it really appreciating the knowledge that I gained from it, and like I feel way more comfortable than I think I would have felt if I hadn't done it in the neurodivergent space, just because I was well equipped to kind of look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, no, it sounds really valuable. Like, all the things you just described are things that I'm seeking PD for separately. It's like I want to do PD for PDA, for family therapy, for more neurodiversity affirming therapy. Whereas in EdDev Psych, it's all neatly packaged in the one thing.
Yeah, I guess the flip side of that is just my knowledge of like personality disorders isn't up to what a clinical psych would be.
Okay, sure.
Or like, schizophrenia. Like I kind of know that from my own like study and stuff like that, but it's not something that's necessarily covered in the baseline of Ed and Dev.
Right. And something I've been reflecting on lately is like how challenging it is for psychologists to be across the whole totality of human experiences and the whole totality of like every aspect of the DSM. And if we try and be everything to everyone, we're probably going to burn out. So it's like if you're, you might not be further along in personality disorders, but you don't have to, advertise to folks who might be seeking assistance with personality characteristics.
Yeah, and I guess that's the key of it, is just that, like, I work in a highly specialized, like, space. I didn't even get to touch on, like, the fact that I work almost exclusively with queer and, like, trans clients as well, which is another thing that I don't know if I said that.
No, you didn't. Sorry. Yeah. And
so I work a lot with trans kids, which is interesting.
Oh, wonderful. And do you feel like your EdDev training like really helps out with that?
No, that was kind of my own interest.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point. I expected that answer, because it's like, no, I don't think, many university programs, like I know in my own master's, which was the 5+1 course, we had 1 hour on trans and gender diverse folks. How much did I have in this Master of Clin Psych course? I think we had 1 lecture on it too. But it's very much like, it was still really like gender diversity 101. It was like, what is trans? What is non-binary? And I'm like, yeah, like, got it.
But like trans issues, what do you do when your client is questioning their gender? How do you support them? What's gender affirming practice? What do you do about kids that are gender diverse? That's a space that I work in.
I had to do sexology to get like the answers to that question. So that was
that's crazy. Like that should be yeah. And the fact is that a lot of I'm getting ranty now, but a lot of neurodivergent people tend to be queer or gender diverse.
They do. I can't remember the exact statistic, but like a lot. Like I think actually like majority, like if you're like gender diverse, like you might also be neurodivergent.
Yeah, like how many people have taken the time to kind of look into that as far as like that's a new kind of, and it's all like all these people are like outsiders. They're just being told they're wrong. Everything about them is wrong, and it's just horrible. They just need support. Also a really interesting space, but yeah.
Yeah, I love working with folks from the LGBTIQA plus community and neurodivergent folks. It's a wonderful area, and there's definitely a need for more support. Like folks in those communities are usually at higher risk of suicide, self-harm, minority pressures, minority stress, and societal, I guess, like internalization of societal stigma. So there's a whole raft of issues that can come up that as psychologists we can support them with.
Yeah, definitely. And I guess that's like I spoke about this in way back in the first kind of podcast I did with you episode, where like a lot of my clients tend to be on the pointy end because they're dealing with all those things.
Yeah, which is, so yeah, having a psychologist who is educated about the space, an ally in the space, can make a huge difference to these people's lives.
Absolutely, yes.
So, Jordan, was there anything that we haven't touched on which you do want to give some airtime to and tell listeners about?
I think it's worth saying that endorsement's really expensive, and it shouldn't be.
Oh, yes, please. I mean, tell us, like, you know, like, would you feel comfortable sharing, like, round about how much you pay for supervision?
Oh, God. Like, if you're lucky, you can get, like, reduced rates, but you need, like, so much, like, supervision. It's like 80 hours of supervision. And this is for clinical as well, or any other endorsement. And then you need, like, something like, I don't know, like, I'm gonna have to look it up, but 40 hours of PD, and then you have to, like, peer supervision. It's all very expensive if you don't get it covered by, like, your organization that you're with. So unfortunately, because I'm mostly on my own, I'm paying out of pocket, and that can be really expensive. And I guess with a budget coming out and that being a hot topic, I mean, I think this is probably going to be released much later, but the budget just got released like yesterday. Not enough funding is being put towards like training for psychologists, and
it's not.
Yeah, it's really a bit like we have people who can do this, but we need support. Like, how do you expect people to be able to work in these very specialized areas where people are really like, I don't think like none of the stuff that I've talked about necessarily is baseline knowledge for psychologists. Now I'm like soapboxing. That it costs money to train in that, and if we can't get that subsidized, it's like brutal.
No, it's something I've been reflecting on as well. It's like, let's just say like the cost of a supervisor is like $250 a session. 250 times 80, that's a lot of money. Plus upskilling and doing your PD. I think there's like 30 hours of required PD for your registrar program. You know, and let's say PD is 7 hours, $600. That's a lot of money. Yeah, there's a lot of excess money. And if you think about, okay, if you're charging like $200 a session, you know, so you're trading like multiple sessions essentially for your supervision and PD. It's a lot.
Oh yeah, like I had a supervision the other day that costs more than a session I had with a client, and I was like, okay.
Yeah, exactly. Well, usually our supervisors are more experienced than us, so it's like they usually charge more as well. So we're charging.
Yeah, and that's understandable. Yeah.
Yeah, understandable. So it's like, but that means that you're trading like, let's say 1.5 of your own sessions. So you can do 1 hour of supervision. It's a difficult financial situation. And thank you for bringing that up, because I think it's important to speak to the realities of this, that it's been really valuable for you to do the Masters in Ed Dev, but the registrar program presents extra financial challenge.
Yeah, I think it also speaks to like the privilege that I have that I can afford that. Not everyone can. And what does that mean for psychs that do want to specialize but can't afford that, you know?
Yeah. I hate that. I hate that you have to have privilege to be able to gain endorsement. It really grinds my gears.
Indeed.
Jordan, what's your biggest takeaway that you hope listeners will leave with from our conversation today?
I hope I've sparked interest for our listeners to kind of consider it in dev as a legit pathway. I hope more people get interested in ed and dev, because we need more ed and devs out there, because I'm lonely here. I just want more friends who are in my field.
Guys, don't leave Jordan lonely. She really needs more friends.
I do, yeah. I mean, I talk to people every day, but it's not the same as having friends.
That makes sense. And is there any piece of advice you would give to early career psychs that you wish you had when you were first starting out?
Say yes to as much as you can, because, but don't overdo it. Say yes to any opportunity, because the opportunity to say yes to things like volunteer work, or this podcast, for example, gives you an opportunity to meet new people and people that are in the field who you can talk to later and get support with. And that only helps in this career, because we all kind of build on each other, and we rely on each other, and we help each other. And that's how psych works. So it's important to give yourself the opportunity, and not in the manufactured networking way. Just say yes and to helping a friend.
Absolutely. I would echo that. I just think the longer I'm in this career, not that I didn't value it before, but I increasingly recognize the importance of support, and just how isolating we can be in our profession if we don't connect with other people. So yeah, 100% echo that. Jordan, if listeners want to learn more about you or get in touch, where can they find you? And can you name drop your private practice as well?
Yeah, I'm at Jordan Turner Psychology. I work with neurodivergent clients, queer, gender diverse clients, and I'm very interested in AFAB and women, girls on the spectrum. That's kind of my niche, and that's what I did my master's on. But you can find me on Jordan Turner Psych, just the first part of psychology, just psych.com, and that's where I'm at.
Wonderful. And I'll pop that in the show notes so that listeners can take a look. And listeners, I hope this episode did inspire you to consider more with the ed and dev space. It sounds like a wonderful space. So if you're thinking about, well, what would I like to do in the future? Yeah, consider ed dev. And I hope you just enjoyed hearing Jordan's perspectives as well on some of the areas of ed dev. Thanks so much for listening. And don't forget that word of mouth is the best way to get the podcast into new ears. So please tell your mate, tell your colleague, tell your dog, tell your cat, tell anyone who has ears. I would really appreciate it. And if you want to say hi, you can catch me on the socials, or you can email me at mentalworkpodcast@gmail.com. That's a wrap. Thanks for listening to Mental Work. Have a good one and catch you next time. Bye.